name is Anna Sonoda, and I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I have been working for the last 3 years on a book called Duck Duck Groom, Understanding How a Child Becomes a Target. And this, the origin story of this book is that when I was preparing to get my master's in social work, I was placed in a facility to treat convicted sex offenders. And what I noticed when I walked into the lobby that first day was, this room looks like any other room I might find myself in. There's nothing that stands out, and everybody looks very normal on the outside. What I learned over the course of the years that I was working there is that what I needed to pay attention to was not what they looked like, but how they behaved. So I did my time, I got my license, and I moved on to other clinical settings, and then, as the old adage goes, I had my own kids. And everything changed. I stepped out of my role as a clinician, and I stepped full throttle into my role as a mom. And in about 2013, I decided I have to write a book about what I learned from convicted offenders and how that shapes and impacts what I do on a daily basis with evaluating babysitters, with communicating with my kids, the way that I set expectations, the way I supervise. That was just built in for me, but I noticed time and time again at the playground, at coffee dates, at lunches out with friends, what really ate at me from the inside was most people don't have this information, and if we could just somehow distribute that information out into the world, we could protect a tremendous amount of kids. Because right now, the way we think about child sex abuse is that it's random and that it has no intention whatsoever. And I want to reverse that. I want everyone here, by the time you leave, if you take away nothing else, it's that it's intentional, it is progressive, and it's observable. And therefore, we have an opportunity at every turn along the grooming path to intervene. So, as I was saying, we had a couple of kids, now we have 5 kids. And I'm deep into momming those kiddos. And about 3 years ago, when I had a little 6-month-old baby, I hired Sarah, who's just entered the room, and I said, you know, this book is eating me alive from the inside, and I need to exercise it out of me. So this book is my exorcism. This is the culmination of the distress I had from the unimaginable, the unthinkable, the worst possible outcome you could think for your child. I said, this information could possibly benefit somebody. So Sarah and I met week after week after week with, breastfeeding a baby, burping a baby, toddlers running around the floor, going to the YMCA. She was very flexible. And what I learned over the process was I had a very lofty expectation of how many grooming steps there are. And I told Sarah, well, I've got 9. I've got 9 grooming steps. And she said, Anna, you cannot write a book with 9 stages. You're gonna lose your reader. So I worked and I got it down to 7. And she was like, oh, for crying out loud, you have got to get it down. So the organization of the book is the 4 stages of grooming, because I edited myself. Then the access roles, because the most important thing that people don't realize is that if you don't have the 2 ingredients, you cannot have child sex abuse. And those 2 ingredients are access and space. So when we're paranoid or we're concerned about a grandchild or a child or a kid in our school, what we need to think about is, what is the access? Who has access to this child, and what available spaces are there? So if we don't have those 2 ingredients, we cannot have child sex abuse. This includes physical spaces, but it also includes online spaces, which more and more parents are having to manage the role of online and internet access, especially when it comes to predation and possibly giving away more information than you want your child to be giving away. So if we go back to grooming, I've written down behind me the 4 stages of grooming. So that first stage is baiting the trap. And you might think, oh, a trap is a little overblown, Anna. But what I want you to be thinking about is that children are like sitting ducks. You know, the title of my book is a little strange, Duck Duck Groom. But if we thought about children as little vulnerable ducks who require an adult to get them across the pond, across the road, then we would probably be more inclined to have a view of this that is protective and is assertive and is oftentimes going to lean into more skepticism than more trust. And some people ask me, oh, well, now I'm going to be paranoid about everybody who comes in contact with my child. No, you don't need to be paranoid about everybody, but you do need to be conscientious of the fact that anybody who wants to eliminate a parent's role or decrease the volume of your influence on a child's life is a warning sign. So if we go into this idea about the 4 stages of grooming, the first stage is baiting the trap with compliments. So when I meet somebody, they're likely to say, oh my gosh, I met Jimmy on the tennis court and he is so dynamic and he's got so much potential and we're so thankful to have him on the team and you're doing such a wonderful job with him at home. I wonder what ways I can help support Jimmy in his tennis work. So as a parent, after having that interaction, I think, okay, well, I'm doing pretty well, and I probably think that this coach is somebody who should be trusted and should get increased access to my child. So it is easy for adults to fall for the grooming. And actually, we have to be part of the grooming process because without our granting, there is no access. So if I don't believe that the person is true and trustworthy and responsible, then guess what? I'm not going to turn my child over. None of us would turn our child over to a stranger or to somebody we don't trust. So that's a really important dynamic here that we initially get flattered, we get compliments, and then we move into stage 2, which is setting the trap with favors. So you've all probably heard about free babysitting. You've heard about those people who just show up in your life and they're giving gifts and they're so generous with their time and they don't ask anything of you. And that should be a warning sign. There are ways to give gifts to children. There are ways to be generous to your family without grooming. Some of those ways might be asking permission first. I'd really like to give Sally a special present for her birthday. Would you mind if I bought her this bracelet? Because if you come to me as the parent first, you are getting my permission. You are not going behind my back. And one of the key themes behind this is that you'll see a potential predator taking your opinion, the value of your discernment, and putting it to the side. Not checking with you first, not asking you permission, but just making a decision that impacts your child, and that should be a warning sign to you. So after we have set the trap with favors, we're then going to move into the guilt stage. Now this is where it gets really enticing, especially for adolescents, where developmentally they want to break your rules. They are supposed to be pulling away from you. And so when someone offers them, let's say, an NC-17 movie or an R-rated movie or a bottle of beer or a wine cooler, if those things still exist, then suddenly the child is faced with a decision. Am I going to veer off of the expectations my parents have for me, or am I going to follow my parents' expectations and possibly disrupt the relationship that this adult is building with me? And it's very easy during those settings to entrap a child in guilt, because it's very easy to make a child feel guilty. It's actually a lot easier than we think. I can just look at one of my children and say, oh, I'm very disappointed. Oh, it just breaks their heart. So we have to keep in mind that making a child feel guilty can then make them less likely to come to us to say, hey, Uncle Tommy gave me a beer when I was over at the house for the spend the night, and I don't know that you and Dad don't allow us to have alcohol, but he gave me alcohol and I want you to know about that. And it's in our response and our reaction to Tommy coming to us that is the real linchpin. If I go down his throat and say, "How dare you drink that? You should never have done that. You should have called me immediately and I would have come and got you. Oh, I'm gonna get so angry at him when I see him next." Instead, I can turn that into an opportunity to have a conversation, to listen to his perspective, to say, what was that like for you? How did you handle that situation? Why do you think we don't want you drinking alcohol? And cracking open the potential learning lesson in that moment, and then you handle the uncle on your own time. Because one of the other resounding points is that kids cannot protect themselves from child sex abuse. They have to have adults to protect them. And more of education in schools and youth programs is about teaching children to recognize child sex abuse. And I think we're really going down the wrong path there because it's our responsibility. If you're a grandparent, if you're an aunt or uncle, if you volunteer with kids, if you work closely with kids, you've got to remember that you have an incredible role to play because you are one of the caring adults. So you have the potential to see grooming as it's going, paying attention to patterns of behavior. Isn't it strange that the music teacher is always taking the 11 to 13-year-old boys out to lunch in his office? That's curious. I'm going to ask more questions. I'm going to bring it up. I'm not just going to let myself be taken by the amazing relationship the person has with those children. So always trust but verify and be a little skeptical, because if we're going to err on one side or the other, we're always going to err on the side of be a little more suspicious. And if you see something or if you detect something, then you must report it. We know that only 31 of every 100 cases of child sex abuse is even reported. And of that, only 55% of those are investigated. So when we look at something like the sex offender registry that many people who are looking at real estate or moving say, the first thing I've got to do is check the sex offender registry. And I always tell my friends, I'm far less worried about the people on a sex offender registry and much more worried about the people not on a sex offender registry. And when we look at the potential predators, they're more and more likely not to be on such a list. Not to scare you, but that's why we all need to be prepared and we need to assess our situations, especially when we're thinking about access and space. Okay, so one thing that I think is really cool about the book is that we've talked about access roles. So when you're evaluating a space, you might think, oh, well, let's take homes, for example. 82% of all child sex abuse occurs in the home of the victim or it occurs in the home of the predator. So a lot of people are really pro sleepovers, for example. I'm less pro sleepover, but that's normally because the child I get back from a sleepover is a complete and utter wreck. And it takes a good 12 to 18 hours to get them re-regulated. But what we also know is that if the highest risk is occurring in our home or in the home of others, then if we educated adults, we educated parents, then we could eliminate a large chunk of abuse just by saying, instead of doing a sleepover, instead of doing a play date where you might come in contact with older siblings who are potential predators, with boyfriends, with family members, instead of doing that, let's go meet at a Sky Zone. Let's go meet at the library. Let's go out to a playground or someplace physical, because we can eliminate that risk if we just keep in mind about spaces and access. When you came in here tonight and you thought, oh, I'm going to learn about grooming.
I didn't know there was such a thing. I thought it just happened. It was
random, like a bolt of lightning.
Yeah.
And most people agree with you. And my argument would be, it is so intentional and it is so progressive because it's a perverse form of courtship. So all of us have experienced at some form or another that new dating, you see somebody you're interested in, you are falling for them, they want to spend more time with you. So if we could think about grooming as perverse courtship, something that should not be happening because kids are never sexual objects, and yet we're moving slowly into a relationship where we're having compliments, we're offering favors, we are setting the child up to break their own rules so that they feel guilty, so that they won't speak. And then we've opened the door to stage number 4, where a potential predator can threaten them and say, well, you know, if you tell your mom what's happening, then I'm going to move out, and she's not going to be able to afford this house, you're not going to be able to afford to go to your school, you're going to lose the car, that means grandpa's going to move out, you won't see me anymore. So you can imagine how much of a trap this really is. And many people will say, well, why didn't the child just tell somebody? Why didn't they just, use the dinner time conversation or bedtime conversation just to tell us? What we do know statistically is that most kids tell other kids. They don't typically tell their parents, they typically tell other kids. So what I would inform you of is, once you go out into the world tonight, is let's talk to our kids about child sex abuse, because maybe they're protected, or your grandkids, but maybe there's a child in their life who they're spending time with who says, I have a secret, or I don't really like when I have to go home, or I don't really like going over to my grandparents' house because this happens. Let's prepare our children to handle that situation, to bring that information to us so that we can report it and act on their behalf, on their safety. So grooming is a really misunderstood term. And what I would say is that grooming is the perverse courtship that is the channel to getting access and space alone with a child for the purposes of child sex abuse. What we're going to be looking for are sudden changes. We're going to be looking for changes in dress, changes in appearance, changes in hygiene. We're going to be looking for changes in activity choice. If my piano teacher is entrapping me, then I'm probably going to want to drop piano. I might not come out and say, I feel really uncomfortable with her at practice when she's doing the lessons, but I might come home one day and say, nope, I've decided to drop piano after 10 years of only exclusively doing that one instrument. And you might say, Anna, do you know how much time and effort your mother and I have put into the piano for you? We bought that piano that sits untouched in the living room because of your interest in the piano. Now, if I'm a child in that situation, I might say, great, this is going nowhere. I'm almost, my hands are tied. So we're paying attention to hygiene, we're paying attention to dress, we're paying attention to their sexual play or activity. So you'll often see with really young kids that they might play inappropriately with their toys or dolls or things like that. I think the thing to keep coming back to is if the parental structure in the household is safe and stable and secure, then we have a greater likelihood that the differences in behavior are going to be picked up on. You're not eating anymore, or you're overeating, or you used to dress in normal sized clothes and now you wear really big baggy clothes, and that's a change of appearance. You used to not shower as much and now you're showering 2 or 3 times a day. What's happening? Because if there's that parental presence, then we have an opportunity to sit down with our child and say, I'm noticing this change in you. Over the last few days we've seen this and this. Can you tell me what's happening? What's bringing about that change? Because in a child's mind, if I don't come to them on their level and ask those sorts of questions, there may not be space. Children might feel like, well, I'm not even going to attempt to bring something up with mom. I'll just wait. Well, and then I'll wait some more, and then I'll wait some more. And how do I even bring this up? What am I even going to say? And it's very confusing. One of the hallmarks of grooming is that we're creating confusion in the child. Because if we create confusion, then we're going to get silence. Because a child who is confused doesn't really know what's up and what's down. It's sort of like when you scuba dive. They say, you have to have certain indicators that tell you where the air is and where the water level is. So in the same way, we really do a good job of confusing kids during the grooming stages and during predation. By the time we get to the guilt stage or the threat stage, the child's thinking, well, my parents are convinced. They're not necessarily going to believe me. What leg do I have to stand on?